Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Helen from Mode to V. Welcome to my podcast. This is where I share my experience, knowledge and skills.
Action. Oh, it's my podcast. Oh, no, it's your podcast. All right. So we're doing a dual podcast, in case you haven't figured this out. Helen's going to use this for her new podcast, and I've done about 80 podcasts, and I'm slowly getting better at it, but that's open to opinion. So this is Helen. Her business is called Motivate Photography and Presets, but recently I've encouraged her to just say Motivate, which means
Way of life in French.
way of life.
Yes.
She's very good at creating people's brand photography. So any of the photography that you see on my website is done by Helen. She's also my partner, and she loves me dearly because I'm just an awesome man. But, and who am I?
This is Danny de Hek. He is a business networker, entrepreneur, and all-round good guy.
Oh, thank you very much. Very kind. So we thought with lockdown and COVID-19, we thought it'd be a good idea to get more sort of out there. So we decided that a podcast would be good. So I said to Helen, let's do a podcast. And then we started researching how to do a podcast, how to do a good podcast, and it's quite complicated. So we went for a walk. Every day we've been trying to do a 60-minute walk at the moment, which has been pretty good, I must say.
Yeah, it has been.
And I said, hey, let's do a podcast on business networking. And then we thought, well, we better get a template together. So by the time we got back from our walk, we actually had a more of an outline sketch on how to, what we thought would be ways to do a good podcast. And then we decided, well, why don't we just do a podcast on how to start a podcast for other people who might be thinking about doing a podcast.
Podcasts, we did our first podcast 2 weeks ago, and podcasts are harder than what you think. We had a lot of filler words like so, and we're trying to get better at taking those words out.
So first of all, we sort of thought, well, let's get some help. So as I own a business networking company, I've got a guy called David Clarkson. His business is called Dynamic Communications, and he came around and he gave us a whole lot of tips on what we should do and ways that we can stop using filler words, and gave us some really good ideas, actually. Now we just have to implement them all.
And one of the ideas was pausing, and don't be afraid to pause.
So I did a podcast for my business networking last week.
We're just all out of focus.
Oh, excuse me, people. We can't actually stop a live broadcast and edit things while we're doing it.
Just letting you know, we're totally out of focus.
We're out of focus. So I go like that, and then bring it back.
Yeah,
and we should be in focus.
See, the pitfalls of podcasts.
This is true. But the people, what we're actually doing, so you know, we want to create a lot of content. So what we're doing is we're recording this for our YouTube channel as a podcast so people can watch us doing a live podcast. However, the content that we're using for our audio podcast will not be seen by people. So we can't talk about visuals when people are listening to our podcast audibly. And the other great thing that we learned the other day was there's a service out there called Otter.
One called Otter. And you said there was another one?
Yeah, called Descript. Descript.com. And they listen to what we're saying, and then they scribe it all into text. Really, really good. And when I did the podcast recording for my business networkers, it actually told us that we had 159 filler words. And I could click a button and remove them all audibly out of the podcast and also out of the script. So I thought we can still say ums and ahs. It doesn't really matter.
We want to practice getting rid of ums and ahs.
Of course we do. So if you don't know much about myself, I am dyslexic. So I use a lot of voice recognition. So I said to Helen as we went around the walk, what do we want to get out of doing a podcast? What's the purpose behind it?
The purpose behind it is to get our name out there, to... What else do we need to do?
Personal development.
Personal development was the word I was trying to come up with. Yeah.
That's right. So I think we're quite fortunate. I've been in IT and mucking around on computers for 25 years, which makes me sound very old. Well, over 25 years. And I thought we've got a lot going for us at the moment. We've got some really high-tech gear, latest Apple products, which I love. Helen's a PC user, sorry about that. And also, just before lockdown, with my business networking company, I decided because we were going into lockdown, I would start doing podcasts more. And I just so happened to buy a couple of really good microphones. So they're studio quality microphones, bit of an outlay, $600 each roughly. And then I also bought a Zoom H6, which is an awesome recording device, which enables me to record Helen's voice on one track and my voice on another. So it's a really good software. And that's one thing we must stop doing is I did put my phone on mute, but now somebody's ringing me.
Rob Woolley.
Yep, is ringing me while I'm doing a podcast. So another wee thing we must remember to do, which we did do, is to put all our look, Rob will be watching this later on.
Rob's
it's gone now. So all our tech toys onto mute, undisturbed, and then I get vibrated.
Do not disturb.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. So yeah, so we've got a lot of technology, and I know how to use some video editing software. So we've got a lot of tools at our grips that we can use. The next question, we did ask this already actually, and we don't want to bore people by saying the same things twice.
Yeah.
So why do we want to become a podcaster?
We want to share our knowledge, experience and skills.
That's what it says.
Yeah. And we want to become better public speakers. We're working on that at the moment.
Yeah. So I've been doing like Toastmasters for about 5 years. I've stopped it a couple of years ago actually. And I also used to be part of another organisation called National Speakers for New Zealand. And it gave me a lot of opportunities to speak in public. And it's really helped me a lot. And because I'm dyslexic, I need to pronounce words correctly so that when I'm using voice recognition, the words turn up on the screen correctly. And using the service Otter and Descript, I really have to pronounce the words correctly so it can scribe it correctly. So if you do read the podcast notes and they're all funny, then you'll know I didn't pronounce the word correctly. It's like my company is called Elite 6, but it described it as Elite 6. So if you were reading it and you didn't listen and hear that, it would be like, what's that guy talking about?
We also found that we talked over each other a lot.
No, we didn't.
We did?
No, we didn't. Cool.
And then the transcribing was really hard to work that out. I couldn't work it out because we were talking over the top of each other.
How are we going to build our audiences? You're a photographer. I'm a networker, techno freak, and I want to get my message out. How do you think we're going to build our audience?
I think we put our podcasts on Facebook, we put our podcasts on LinkedIn, and we get them out on social media as much as we can. So
is Facebook and LinkedIn a platform you can publish your podcast on?
No, for the podcast, it's, true. I'm thinking more of the audio side of it. But for the podcast
so can
itself,
you post blogs onto Facebook?
Yeah.
No.
Well, you can.
No, you share content.
Share content, same thing. See, I'm not up with the IT stuff like that.
So if you were thinking about doing a podcast, you need a service to host your podcast files. So about a year ago, I decided to do a bit of search for those very things. I didn't know anything about podcasts, and I thought, what do you do with these audio files? So I went to Facebook and I joined a group, and I asked that very question. How do you get your audio files onto the interweb? And they recommended a couple of services, and one of them was Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout enable you to upload your sound file, and then they add it into all the podcasting sites like Apple Podcasts, for example. And there's another real big one. I just recently got myself Pandora.
And isn't it Spotify as well? You can put it on Spotify. Yeah.
So if you're looking on Spotify and you're thinking, wow, look at all these podcasts, how do they do it? It's often a hosting service like Buzzsprout, and it's been brilliant. Then I went to Buzzsprout, and they have all these YouTube videos telling you how to do everything. And I thought, wow, that makes it a lot easier. So I recommend doing that if you're doing that at the moment. Let's just practice pausing.
I think we're quite good at that now. So, Danny, how do you monetize podcasting?
Not too concerned about that. The other day, a company contacted myself called Milanote. And Milanote are like, has anyone ever used Trello? And it's really good for project management software. They approached me and offered me a lifetime membership to their software. And then I said, oh, can I get 2 of them, one for Helen, one for me, so we can test it? And then we used the software, and it was really good. And we're going to do a podcast on it. Now, yeah, I probably wouldn't have bought the software, but now I've used it, I really like it. So I want to talk about things I'm passionate about, but I didn't expect somebody to come to me and ask me to use their software. So I'm just not really going to go after the money side of it. What I really want to do is help people grasp and understand technology and use it to its maximum to better their businesses. So that will naturally make money, I believe. If somebody comes along and says, look, if you mention Cadbury's chocolate, we'll give you $10,000. I'm going to love Cadbury's chocolate.
Even though you're a vegan, yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Talking about the vegan things, because one of the questions here that we've got is, do you listen to any podcasts at the moment?
Yeah, I often listen to Gary Vaynerchuk's podcast.
Vaynerchuk?
Vaynerchuk?
Something like that.
How's his name?
Vaynerchuk.
No, it is actually Vaynerchuk.
Vaynerchuk.
Yeah.
Who's he?
He is a big wig in America, and he started his podcast. It was really interesting. He started his podcast as a wine reviewer because his dad owned a wine shop and he used to review his dad's wine. And he started broadcasting it and got bigger and bigger. And now he's this multi-millionaire that does all these podcasts to do with business and networking and social media.
Yeah, and I read his book called Crushing It. And it was about building your personal brand. So I've really, in the last year, been really working on that simply because what I've gleaned from him. The other one too is we did go vegan. We haven't always been vegans, but we decided, I come back from a big trip when I turned 50, beginning of the year, and Helen was contemplating about becoming a vegetarian. So I said, well, let's forget vegetarian, let's go vegan. And we listened to Joe Rogan and the guy, we watched a Netflix documentary first.
We watched a Netflix documentary called The Game Changers, and Game Changers is about athletes eating plant-based food and having really good performances and having good outcomes. And so we watched this Netflix documentary, and then we listened on a podcast to Joe Rogan with the guy who made Game Changers, who's called James Wilkes. And the podcast was actually 3.5 hours long.
Yeah, so we were trying to think, when we were walking around with the dog, trying to figure out how long do we do a podcast for, and with David Clarkson. David Clarkson, he suggested that 7 to 10 minutes is a good side of it. But then I said, well, we didn't actually listen to one for 3.5 hours. And then I thought, well, when we listen to Netflix, we're that terrible people that we listen to the first episode of a Netflix documentary. I think The Good Wife was one of them. And I watched 140 episodes. I watched 8, whatever they are. And I just watched a whole lot. And I thought, well, maybe they're serial podcast listeners. And I thought, well, we listened to a podcast for 3.5 hours, but we were driving. And
yeah, that was the difference.
Yeah. So maybe we can get away with longer and shorter podcasts. Who knows? And then we thought, well, do we need to listen to a podcast every Friday? Like, how often do we publish this podcast that we're going to do?
I think keeping to a regular schedule is really good. Like every Friday is great. And then people know that they can tune into your podcast on a Friday and they're waiting for your content.
And what about, we thought about a theme, and obviously we've gone off target straight away because we were going to talk about business networking. And now we're talking about tips really on becoming a podcaster and also overcoming the obstacles that we've got. So what theme are we going to talk about?
Well, I suggested writing out 20 themes and then picking one. And really we talked about just random ramblings, I guess, about our life and about what we've done.
Well, if you wrote out 20 themes, I mean, they're going to date, aren't they? I mean, I like to talk about things that are happening now.
Yeah.
And also current.
Yeah, current trending themes, I guess.
You don't see the newspapers getting out there and writing out 20 themes and then publishing their paper for the year. Maybe that, I don't know. I'm just sort of saying.
No, but we did talk about that, didn't we?
Well, originally, we thought that you thought that you might have thought it was a cool idea to talk about photography until the cows come home. And then I think, have you got 20 topics? If you were going to do a theme podcast on photography, that would make sense. You'd need to plan it out. But my genre, I think your genre is the same. We're more talking about life.
That's right. Yeah, I don't want a podcast to just be about photography. I want to talk about anything and everything.
All right then. Content. Content is king.
Content is king.
So we need to make it interesting. And then if we're looking at building an audience, suppose we have to tell people to press that button, subscribe to our podcast. Is that too aggressive?
It might be a wee bit, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, maybe more passively, like check out my website address, www.
No.
No, that's not good either?
Subscribe now.
Yeah, subscribe now. Because, I don't like being told what to do. And normally, if I'm searching around the internet and I'm looking for videos and I find someone that helps me and gives me some useful information, I naturally subscribe. So that's my mentality. But maybe if there's a few brain dead people out there, we need to guide them and need to tell them to click that button.
I think people know to click the button.
Yeah. Okay.
It's got to be relevant. It's got to be interesting. Well, people aren't going to click that button, are they?
So David helped us quite a lot, and he said maybe at the end of our podcast we give people a point of action. So we'd need to sort of, because this is a dual podcast, because this is actually for Helen's podcast. This is one of her first ones, and it's always going to be used on my podcast. And then I'm going to use a different intro and a different ending for each podcast, which sounds very exciting. But if you listen to it on dehek.com, it's going to be a different intro. But if you listen to it on Motivate, it's going to have a different intro. However, we're using the same content twice. So we kind of needed to give people something we're going to talk about next time. But I might not talk about it. We might not do a joint podcast next time.
We might not.
You might think this didn't work.
Yeah. I think we're rambling now.
Yeah. So we need to conclude what we talked about.
Yeah. So highlights, Danny.
Okay. So if we're thinking about doing a podcast,
yeah,
how are you going to make money out of it?
I don't think I'm going to monetize my podcast.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
What's some advantages that we have?
We work from home. We have amazing equipment.
Brilliant. Why did we want to do this?
We want to get our name out there and we want to be better public speakers.
I like the sound of my own voice.
Yeah.
Brilliant. How are we going to build an audience?
Subscribe now.
Brilliant. Yeah, we want to endorse people's products.
Yeah.
Alcohol.
Yeah.
Wine.
Yeah. Send it to us now.
Gluten-free vegan shit.
Oh.
Whoa. Can't say word shit.
No.
I think that's about it. So, yeah, so thank you for listening. And maybe next time they tune in, we will give them a podcast on... who knows? It'd be a surprise. But if you subscribe,
you'll find out.
Your technology will send you a bleep when we actually publish a new one.
Just remember, anyone can do a podcast.
All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I don't know how long that was, David. 40 minutes. Oh my God. No. We might chop it into 4 podcasts.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, love you guys, even though I don't know yous. All right. Well, how do we push end?
Press the
Stop being.